Celeste Duval's voice was still echoing through the hidden speakers when the word thief appeared in the fogged mirror behind her. Investors froze mid-sip, eyes widening as her own recorded confession played on loop. "We'll drown him in fines until he folds." And just like that, the woman who tried to steal a man's home with a bylaw watched her empire unravel inside a cabin that had been waiting for her. On the first morning of June, as a gentle mist curled off Alderbloom Lake, and the air smelled faintly of rosewood and dew, Noah Whitaker stood barefoot on his deck, cradling a mug of black coffee and letting the silence settle deep into his chest. This place, his father's cabin wrapped in ivy and the fading blush of heirloom roses, had been his retreat for the past 12 months. A year ago, grief had driven him from San Diego, grief and exhaustion. Aerospace engineering had taken enough of his life, and losing his wife to a sudden aneurysm had taken the rest. The city, the contracts, the empty condo, it all blurred after the funeral. So he packed up what little mattered and returned to the house his parents had built with their hands, and he slowly rebuilt something of himself among the thorns and sawdust. The cabin sat on 3 acres of lakefront property that once belonged to the Whitaker family nursery. His mother, Jeanette, had planted every rose that still bloomed around the weathered porch, Lady Banks, Iceberg, Don Juan, each one a living memorial. He spent his days restoring the old structure and his nights tinkering with his personal project, Rose, the responsive observation security engine, a smart home defense system built from surplus military-grade tech and civilian-grade paranoia. That quiet morning ended with the crunch of tires on gravel. He turned as a gleaming white SUV, the kind marketed to soccer moms and real estate agents, pulled into his driveway. It didn't belong to any of the quiet older neighbors who waved politely but kept to themselves. The door opened and out stepped a woman dressed in crisp ivory slacks and a blush pink blazer. She walked like someone used to owning every room she entered. Her heels clicked on the wood as she climbed the porch without knocking. "Noah Whitaker," she said, offering a smile so practiced it could have been laminated. "What a lovely morning to finally meet. I'm Celeste Duval, president of the Alder Glen Estates Homeowners Association. I hope I'm not interrupting." She was, but he didn't say it. Instead, he nodded slowly and gestured to the porch chair opposite his own. Celeste sat uninvited, crossed her legs, and pulled a silver tablet from her oversized handbag, like she was prepping for a sales pitch. "I'll get to the point," she began, tapping the screen. "The Alder Glen HOA is hosting a fundraiser next Saturday evening. It's for my mayoral campaign, and I've selected your property as the ideal venue. The view, the roses, the rustic charm, it's exactly the ambiance we want to create." He blinked. "Excuse me, I filed the necessary notice," she continued as if reading from a legal script. Section 11. 7 of the revised seasonal bylaws permits temporary community use of private property for public benefit. This event qualifies. You'll need to vacate by Friday evening so the team can begin staging. Noah set down his coffee. "This is my home, not a public venue." Celeste smiled wider as though indulgent of a stubborn child. "We're talking about one night, Mr. Whitaker. It's in the interest of the entire community." He stared at her, the gears already turning. "That bylaw wasn't in effect when I moved here." She tilted her head. "It was passed in January. Notifications were mailed. I never got one." "Perhaps you overlooked it," she said breezily, already tapping away on her screen. "In any case, the decision has been made. You'll receive formal notice by mail today." With that, she stood, walked to the edge of the porch, and began snapping photos of his rose bushes, his front door, even the handmade bench he'd carved from driftwood. He followed her down the steps. "I didn't give you permission to enter my property, let alone host an event here." "You're part of this community, Mr. Whitaker," she said over her shoulder, "and I intend to make sure everyone does their part." She drove off in a flurry of dust and lavender perfume. He stood in the gravel long after the SUV disappeared down the hill. Later that day, he walked into Bloom and Vine, the flower shop and tea room, down by the post office run by Iris Moreno, who'd lived in the area longer than anyone not buried in the local cemetery. Iris had sharp eyes, steady hands, and a memory like a ledger. When Noah mentioned Celeste's visit, Iris's face darkened like thunder, rolling in over the lake. She did the same thing to the Lafrences, Iris said, pouring him a glass of hibiscus iced tea. Code violations. Buy the book, community benefit claims. Then came the 4 sale signs. And guess who bought those homes? Noah raised an eyebrow. Shell companies tied to Elliot Granger, the developer she's been whining and dining for months. Wants to turn this side of the lake into a wellness spa retreat for out-of-town elites. Your roses, they'd make the perfect branding. Noah set down his glass. So this fundraiser is a real estate stunt. It's a real estate takeover, Iris corrected. And your cabin is next. By the time he got home, the envelope was in his mailbox, an official HOA notice, citing Section 11.7, complete with Celeste's signature, and a line at the bottom. Thank you in advance for your cooperation and community spirit. His fingers tightened around the letter. That night, unable to sleep, he opened the cedar chest beneath his father's old drafting table. Inside were blueprints for the cabin, yellowed with age but precise as ever. Notes in the margins mentioned fail-safe wiring, EM shielding, and west-facing panel access. His father, a Vietnam-era communications officer, had spent years retrofitting the cabin with military know-how before Noah ever added his own layers of tech. He followed the map to a hollow in the wall behind the fireplace where he uncovered a panel of dials and switches untouched since the 1980s. He grinned. Well, Dad, I think we're going to need every bit of this. He dusted off the panel and returned to his desk where his laptop glowed with the warm interface of Rose, his AI. The cabin had been his retreat, but now it would be his fortress. Over the next 48 hours, Noah worked in a blur of wiring, coding, and quiet fury. He adjusted the facial recognition systems to flag HOA officials. He upgraded the humidity sensors to trigger misters in targeted zones. He installed directional speakers that could mimic human voices and replay pre-recorded conversations. Rose responded to his commands like a loyal dog finally off the leash. But he wasn't alone. Word of Celeste's overreach had reached Judge Franklin Rhodes, a retired environmental judge, who now lived quietly in a solar-powered A-frame across the lake. Frank brought HOA records, court filings, and a fire in his belly that hadn't gone out since the Nixon years. Then there was Dr. Lily Penn, a young botanist from the State University who'd been cataloging the heirloom rose species along Alderbloom's shoreline. She had already clashed with Celeste over proposed zoning changes that threatened protected flora. When she saw the resort renderings leaked from Iris's contacts, she looked like she might cry. These rose species date back to the 1800s, she said, brushing a gloved hand across one of Noah's bushes. If they bulldoze this property, it won't just be unethical. It'll be ecocide. Noah nodded. Then let's make sure they don't. The final piece fell into place when Cal Duvall, Celeste's own husband, knocked on Noah's door late one night. The man looked tired. His designer suit hung like armor he no longer believed in. I can't stop her, he said without introduction, but I can slow her down. He handed Noah a flash drive. Everything she's planned, every fake bylaw, every deal with Granger. She calls it Operation Rose Gold. I call it the end of this town. Noah accepted the drive in silence, then looked up into the night sky above Alderbloom Lake stars, shimmering between branches of old pines and the glow of his mother's roses lining the fence line. They had tried to take his home. Now they would see what happened when the home fought back. Noah Whitaker hadn't slept. The night after Cal Duvall handed him the flash drive felt less like a turning point and more like the opening of a war chest. The file labeled Rose Hall Expansion contained high-resolution blueprints with every square foot of his family's property neatly sectioned off for future development spa suites, a yoga pavilion, and a wine deck that would replace his mother's rose arbor. Each document was time-stamped bearing Celeste Duvall's digital signature, and tucked inside the metadata were emails between her and Elliot Granger discussing how reframing the cabin as community-use property would ease investor concerns. He closed the laptop slowly, heart pounding, then whispered to the empty room. It's not just a party, it's an invasion. Rose, the AI he designed to be a smart assistant, now had to evolve into a quiet soldier. With the override panel now activated, he began integrating new protocols. The facial recognition program was expanded. Anyone from HOA staff Granger's firm or Celeste's campaign team would trigger tracking temperature shifts and audio recording. He adjusted the internal climate zones, programming them to spike heat gradually when Celeste's face was detected, subtly pushing her flawless makeup into ruin. The bathroom mirrors were synced with Rose's microprojector, triggering the word thief to appear in fog when her facial pattern registered. Directional sound emitters were hidden behind rose pattern wallpaper, preloaded with her own voice clips, collected through previous visits and intercepted audio clips in which she admitted to modifying bylaws without proper HOA votes and even suggested faking community support. By Tuesday, the cabin was no longer just a home, it was a net. Celeste, unaware that the gears had begun turning against her, ramped up her efforts publicly. Flyers appeared in neighbors' mailboxes promoting a lakeside evening of unity and progress. A local columnist published a glowing article describing how Alder Bloom's most charming residence had been graciously offered by Mr. Whitaker for the occasion. The lie was spreading like fertilizer on roots he'd never nurtured. Then came the signs, literally. Temporary event signage went up at the road's edge. Crews arrived without notice to measure the front yard, claiming they had logistics clearance from the HOA. When Noah asked to see paperwork, they shrugged and said to talk to Miss Duval. That evening, Rose's thermal sensors flagged motion. When he checked the surveillance logs, there was Garrett Murrow, HOA compliance manager, stepping onto his porch at midnight using a key to enter. Noah froze the feed. The bastard had made a copy. Garrett wandered through the kitchen, snapped photos of wiring, then headed toward Noah's office exactly where the override panel sat. But before he could reach it, Rose activated Protocol Beta. Subtle floorboard shifts altered the room's acoustics, and a low-frequency hum began pulsing beneath the floor. Garrett paused, shook his head like he had water in his ears, then stumbled backward as a light in the ceiling flickered deliberately. 3 seconds later, a burst of lavender-scented mist shot from a sprinkler head, soaking only him. Garrett fled, leaving behind a crumpled manila folder. Inside a revised resort timeline. Rose Hall, groundbreaking, August 12th. Noah sat back, the folder in his lap. They weren't waiting for permits, they were assuming he'd be gone. Over the next 3 days, he installed biometric locks, rewrote access logs, and refined Rose's ethics filters to avoid harming non-targets. He reached out to Dr. Lily Penn, who docked her small houseboat just offshore. With her help, Rose's motion tracking was calibrated to recognize protected plant zones and alert them to any damage. She also discovered that 3 of Noah's rose species were endangered variants in an environmental goldmine. Meanwhile, Judge Rhodes delivered a folder thicker than a phone book, 3 years' worth of HOA revisions, passed through technicalities or during holiday weeks. One bylaw had even been snuck in under a seasonal lighting regulation. It granted the HOA president emergency powers for temporary land repurposing. Rhodes circled it. This is how she got your cabin, but it also violates 2 state disclosure statutes. We can use this. Iris Moreno, ever the tactician, ran recon. She learned that Celeste had invited 30 investors, 8 local politicians, and a handful of magazine writers. Elliot Granger was attending in person along with his top acquisition specialist. Their goal wasn't just to wine and dine donors, it was to publicly present the cabin as acquired. They were going to treat his home like it was already theirs. Noah smiled for the first time in weeks. Let's make it unforgettable. Friday arrived with humid skies, in a forecast of clear evening weather, perfect for roses and for ruining reputations. Noah packed a visible suitcase, waved to a few neighbors, and drove off toward Lily's houseboat across the lake. Celeste's team interpreted it as surrender. The real game was only beginning. From the boat, Noah activated Rose's full engagement mode. As Celeste's crew arrived, the cabin began recording every voice, every footstep. The thermostats inched upward with each hour. Music systems began subtly warping the ambiance, playing classical instrumentals until Granger's name was mentioned, then switching to a low looping drone designed to induce unease. At 6:15 p.m., the first guests arrived in designer clothing, escorted through Noah's rose garden and into a cabin bathed in soft light and the scent of blooming flowers. Celeste greeted them with champagne and speeches. She spoke of unity, community vision, and revitalizing the lakefront with natural elegance. Then Elliot Granger stepped inside. Perfect, he said, surveying the old wood beams. This will sell easily. At 6:32 p.m., Rose initiated Phase 2. When Celeste led Granger into Noah's office, the proposed planning room, a hidden speaker clicked on, and her own voice filled the space. Once we rezone this, we won't even need to buy him out. We'll drown him in fines until he folds. Granger turned sharply. Was that? You, before she could answer, the hallway lit with screens displaying the blueprints Cal had leaked. Rose Hall, initial acquisition, Target Whitaker property. Then came the sprinkler burst, not water, but a fine mist of floral spray carefully targeted to smear makeup and stain designer silk. Screams rang out. Rose triggered the directional speaker again, this time projecting a recorded phone call between Celeste and her campaign manager. The neighbors will eat it up. They're too old or too polite to ask questions. Investors began to flee. Two guests slipped on the mist-slicked floors. A local councilman stormed out demanding answers. Celeste, soaked and red-faced, tried shouting for the speakers to stop. That's when the final command played. "Override 7, Noah whispered into his mic. Rose dimmed the lights, activated the fireplace remotely, and displayed a single message on every screen. "This property is not for sale. You are trespassing." Cameras captured every moment. And just as Celeste lunged for a laptop, the mirrored wall fogged over, and the word thief bloomed across the glass. It was over. Elliot Granger stepped outside, muttering something about breach of agreement. Reporters who had arrived late caught footage of drenched donors leaving like rats from a sinking ship. And through it all, Noah sat silently on the houseboat deck, watching the chaos reflect off the lake like a broken painting. His cabin had spoken for itself. Celeste Duvall stood soaked and seething in the middle of Noah Whitaker's living room as the last of her guests fled into the night. Her blazer clung to her like seaweed. Her heels squelched with every frantic step, and the once sleek waves of her hair now drooped in dripping tendrils across her face. Every screen in the cabin still glowed with rotating images of HOA manipulation, fraudulent signatures, and damning emails. The soft glow of LED lights along the baseboards pulsed in a rhythm that felt more alive than electronic, as if the cabin itself was breathing victory. From his vantage point on Dr. Lily Penn's houseboat, Noah watched in silence, eyes fixed on the monitors, as Celeste's perfect world crumbled room by room. Rose calmly logged every reaction, every overheard whisper, every failed attempt to shut down the system. It was over. And the storm that followed made the chaos of the fundraiser look like a light drizzle. The very next morning, Judge Frank Rhodes walked into the emergency HOA board meeting with a folder nearly as thick as his elbow and placed it on the table without a word. The room, packed with homeowners still buzzing from the previous night's debacle, fell silent. He tapped the folder. 3 years of irregular votes, dozens of unauthorized amendments. Section 11 shown itself passed during a non-quorum session logged as a holiday lighting policy review. Every page signed by Celeste Duvall. A slow ripple moved across the audience, confusion, giving way to recognition, then outrage. Then Iris Moreno stood. Calm, steady. "I nominate a vote of no confidence." No one opposed her. Celeste, absent from the meeting, had already fled Alder Glen by mid-morning, retreating to a hotel in Duluth after Granger severed ties and her campaign sponsors began pulling support. Her phone went unanswered. Her political website was quietly deactivated, and her husband Cal filed for divorce the following week, citing irreconcilable ethical differences. Within a month, Iris was elected HOA president by a landslide. The very first motion she passed, the immediate repeal of Section 11.7 and the dissolution of all community use clauses, previously added without transparent vote. Noah, though not one for speeches, attended the meeting and nodded his approval from the back of the room. The entire community turned to clap. But that wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Dr. Lily Penn's Rose study, previously dismissed by Celeste's planning board, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. With Noah's help, she cataloged each heirloom variety on the Whitaker property, providing conclusive documentation that several rose strains originally believed extinct were not only surviving, but thriving. The state's Department of Natural Resources accepted her findings, granting the lakefront habitat a provisional protective status. Bulldozers were no longer just paused, they were banned. The land that was meant to become Rose Hall Spa became by legal designation an ecological heritage site. In celebration, Lily placed a bronze tag on the arbor beside the cabin's porch. Lady Jeanette, it read, honoring Noah's mother. And with that, the roses she had planted so many decades ago were no longer just memories, they were shields. As news of the fundraiser disaster and the subsequent revelation spread, other residents stepped forward. An elderly couple admitted Celeste had threatened to revoke their parking permit if they didn't agree to a lot sale. A young mother confessed she had received a citation for her daughter's lemonade stand as retaliation for not supporting a zoning change. Garrett Murrow, the HOA's former compliance officer, issued a signed affidavit confirming that Celeste had ordered surveillance devices placed in at least 4 homes, including Noah's. "We were building a case," Garrett admitted. "Not for safety, for leverage." Noah's cabin, once viewed as a strange loner's hideaway, became a symbol. He opened his doors once a month for what they called the Lake Alder Homeowners Defense Circle, a place where neighbors could learn about their rights, get legal advice from Frank, and share stories over tea and Iris's homemade floral china. Rose was no longer just a watchdog. With Lily's help, it had been reprogrammed to monitor water quality, pollen movement, and migratory bird patterns. It alerted the neighborhood when soil pH dipped too low, and even projected which roses would bloom first based on temperature shifts. It had evolved just like Noah. As for Celeste, her mayoral campaign never recovered. Investigations into her conduct spread from local to state level. The $180,000 offer her team had prepared for Noah's property was exposed as part of a broader land acquisition scheme involving shell companies connected to Granger. Licensing boards began combing through her real estate records. Her reputation, once pristine and polished, was now synonymous with deceit. And Elliot Granger, his resort development, quietly dissolved lawsuits pending from investors who claimed they'd been misled. One even wrote a public apology letter to the people of Alderbloom, calling the fundraiser a farce staged on stolen ground. Noah never replied. He didn't need to. His silence had always said more. A year after the event, the Minnesota Preservation Council designated the Whitaker Cabin as a protected community landmark, citing its historical value, ecological significance, and role in preserving community autonomy against coercive development. A plaque was placed near the front gate surrounded by blooming roses. Neighbors came by on weekends bringing pie coffee or just quiet stories. Children played on the grass where event tents had once been measured, and retirees sat in folding chairs beneath the trellises, breathing in peace. One day, a young family moving into Alder Glen asked Iris about the cabin they could see from their upstairs window. She smiled. "That's Noah's place. People say it's the house that bloomed back when someone tried to poison its roots." Noah, now often seen with Lily tending the climbing roses near the fence line, never sought recognition. But every time Rose pinged to life with a new environmental update, every time a neighbor smiled while sipping tea on the deck, he felt something deeper than vindication. He felt home. And the cabin, his father's wood, his mother's garden, his own engineering woven through every beam, stood not just because he had defended it, but because it had reminded a town what community was supposed to mean. Not power, not control, but protection, growth, and truth. The war was over. The roses had won. Would you like a 500-word reflection and lesson for your video's closing segment? Sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with weapons or grand speeches, but with quiet resolve, patient planning, and the courage to say no when no one else will. In Noah Whitaker's story, we see a man who had already weathered personal loss, who sought peace, not conflict. But when that peace was threatened by unchecked power and manipulation disguised as community service, he didn't retreat. He stood his ground not just for himself, but for every neighbor who had once been too afraid to speak up. The real lesson here isn't about smart homes or secret blueprints. It's about knowing your rights, protecting what you love, and understanding that sometimes the most ordinary people become the strongest protectors of truth. Noah didn't go looking for a fight, but when it came to his door, he answered with integrity, creativity, and quiet strength. We also learned something powerful about community, that when people stop being afraid and start coming together, corrupt systems begin to fall apart. Iris, Lily Judge Rhodes, and even Celeste's own husband all played a part in turning the tide. It wasn't one hero, it was a network of voices, each bringing light to the darkness, one small truth at a time. This story also reminds us to question what public benefit really means. If someone claims to speak for the good of all, but silences dissent bullies, individuals, or rewrites the rules in secret, they are not a leader. They are a threat. True community leadership is transparent, inclusive, and rooted in service, not self-interest. To anyone out there who feels like they're being pushed out, talked over, or quietly targeted, take heart. You are not alone. And even when the system seems rigged, remember that truth once revealed is more powerful than any manipulation. And sometimes the most powerful form of resistance isn't yelling louder, it's letting the truth speak for itself. From all of us at US Daily Story, thank you for spending time with us today. We hope Noah's journey gave you not just a moment of entertainment, but something to reflect on. If you've ever faced unfair treatment from a local authority, an HOA, or someone who abused their position, know this: your story matters. Your voice matters. And as always, if this story touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing instructive stories that uncover injustice, celebrate resilience, and remind us all of what's worth protecting. Until next time, stand tall, speak truth, and never underestimate the strength of a quiet man with a rose-covered cabin and a reason to fight.